I am here with Richard Barrett, who's an author, speaker, and internationally recognized thought leader on the evolution of human values in business and society. He's the chairman of the Barrett Values Center and the founder of the Academy for Advancement of Human Values. He's also a fellow of the World Business Academy and former values coordinator at the World Bank. He's the creator of the internationally recognized cultural transformation tools, which have been used to support more than 5,000 organizations in 60 different countries on their transformational journeys. It's really nice to have you here, Richard. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Well, this is interesting to me because I have studied personality assessments and written about them. So any kind of thing that discusses culture and values and any of that type of thing interests me. And I'm very interested in your background. How'd you get into this?
Well, I have absolutely no qualifications for what I do. That's number one. Number two, it's my sole passion. I've been doing it for 25 years now. And I've always been interested right from the get-go in spirituality, psychology, Eastern mysticism, and even though I did a degree in civil engineering, it took me like 25 years to figure out that, yeah, that wasn't for me, and I needed to switch careers, and so that's what I did.
Well, that's fascinating. I was looking at can you first explain the transformational tool? It's the cultural transformational tool, and it's got 7 levels to it. Correct?
Yeah. So let me talk a little very quickly about the model. You can find out most of this information on the website, which I'll give you at the end of the recording. Mm-hmm. So the model is called the 7 levels model, and it was basically an extension and expansion of Maslow's work, extending it by giving more definition to the idea of self-actualization and expanding it in terms of recognizing that each level of consciousness has particular needs, and anything you need is what you value. So you can actually allocate values to levels of consciousness. So if you tell me what your values are, I can tell you what levels of consciousness you're operating from. In fact, listeners can go online and actually do their own values assessment. And again, I'll give you that address at the end of the recording, and you'll get in about a couple of minutes, you'll get a free report linking your values to levels of consciousness, and you'll find it very, very profound and very interesting. Over the last 3 years, 500,000 people have done that.
Wow, that's quite an achievement, and I think it's fascinating that what made you interested in expanding upon Maslow's hierarchy?
Well, I honestly can't tell you. This is going to sound strange, but I live in soul consciousness, and I got the instructions from my soul to. I didn't know it was that in those days, but now I do. It was like, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life, and I kind of got the inspiration, that's inspiration, to take a look at that. I was already fooling around with, I'd written a book called A Guide to Liberating Your Soul, where I'd recognized that there are different stages of soul activation, and I got that from the Vedic tradition. And I thought to myself, what, it'd be really interesting to put Vedic science together with Maslow, and that's how I came to create the 7 levels model. Maslow basically at the bottom, giving all the definition for survival, relationships, and self-esteem, and then the transformation, and then the Vedic tradition giving me deep insights into the upper stages of upper levels of consciousness or stages of development. Now, that's the model. So you asked about the cultural transformation tools. So I took the model, and because you can actually if you tell me your values, I can tell you what levels of consciousness you operated from. I developed a tool for measuring personal consciousness and organizational consciousness and national consciousness, for that matter. So the tool is very simple. We ask 3 questions. Which of the following values and behaviors do you most resonate with you, who you are? Which values represent how you're organization, nation, community operates, and which values represent how you'd like it to operate. And you pick from templates of about 80 or 90 words, which have been customized for your particular context. And so then we aggregate all of the answers by employees or by citizens, and we able to get a very, very deep insight into what's working and not working in a particular culture, organization, community, or nation. And based on that, I developed the company, Barrett Value Center, and in the past 20 years, we've gone from strength to strength, and now we work in 90 different countries all over the world, doing values assessments, mostly for organizations who want to improve their performance. And as they improve their performance, all their operating indicators increase, including profits and employee engagement.
Well, you know, I've seen employee engagement pictures where they've kind of copied the pyramid look from Maslow's, you know, how it's foundational and the next step and the next step, like as that goes. And I could see how this would be very helpful to engagement. I'm curious now, now you know what your values are. What do you do with that?
Well, when you say you, are you talking about individual, organization, or a nation?
Well, let's start at the individual level.
Okay. So the 7 levels model of consciousness, that's what I developed and used it for measuring for quite a number of years. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, I realized that the model was at more than just levels of consciousness. It was also stages of development. So, so the survival stage is 0 to 2. The conforming stage, which is relationships, is 3 to 7, and then the differentiating stage is 8 to 24, roughly. Then from 25 up to late 30s is the individuating stage. Then comes the self-actualization stage in the 40s, the integrating stage in the 50s, and the serving stage in the 60s. And
what happens after that?
Well, in the 60s, you just keep on giving. That's the contributing stage, and you just do more and more. You know, you stop. You stop working for money and for for the good of humanity, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, as I said, about 6 or 7 years ago, I realized I could shift the model from levels to stages. So we grow in stages, and we operate at levels. So, depending on what age you are, I'm not going to ask you your age, but let's assume that...
I'll tell you, I'm in my 50s.
Okay, so in the 50s, that is the integrating stage. And at this stage, what it's all about is you want to make a difference. But the key here is if you can't connect with people, you can't make a difference because, you have to be able to connect. So the 50s is all about connecting so that you can make a difference. That's what the 50s is about. And so each stage of development, you have to master a particular task. And the extent to which you master that task or not either holds you back or accelerates you forward to the next stage. Now, if you're at the integrating stage and suddenly you lose your job, you lose your home, and you lose everything else, you will drop down to the survival level of consciousness. It doesn't mean you go back to the survival stage of consciousness. So consciousness, we operate at levels and we grow in stages.
This is really interesting to me because I'm trying to, I was looking at some of how you try to quantify this, and it's kind of challenging because I just wonder if people take this information and how do they utilize it? I mean, do they really, what if they don't do what you tell them to do?
Well, first of all, I'm not telling anybody to do anything.
Right. Well, what the advice?
So
I know what you mean.
I'm not telling anybody.
Right.
So the customers who come to us from the business sector, they want to improve their performance, or they want to improve their culture, or they want to become a values-driven organization, and they take the results and they see the discrepancies between their personal values, the current culture, and the desired culture. So what we normally see is, what we'd like to see is the values showing up in the personal values match the same levels as the current culture, match the same levels as the desired. But we don't often see that.
I'll bet,
What we normally see is that personal values and desired values match roughly levels of consciousness, but the operating values are much lower levels of consciousness, except in the case of non-profit sector, where people, go to work to make a difference. So in their current culture, they have values up in the upper levels, but in the desired culture, they have values all in the lower levels because they realize that they're handicapped by the fact that they don't have much money and they don't know how to get money. They actually not that good at relationships, and they're not very good at productivity at the third level of consciousness. And so we see this difference between private sector and not-for-profit sector, where the private sector is quite good at the first three levels, but not very good at the upper levels, and the not-for-profit sector is the opposite way around.
Well, did I see that you not only do this at a corporate level, but you also did it for an entire government, for a whole country, or did I misread that?
No, we mapped the values of 27 nations. In fact, I'm just back from Brazil, where we did the second values assessment. We did one in 2010, and I just did another one. I just got back from spending a week there, going over the results and helping them to formulate ideas about how to resolve the issues that showed up in the values assessment. And then I flew straight from Sao Paulo to Toronto last week, and where the Canadians are doing their second values assessment. And a month ago, I did a presentation to the Slovakian people around the results of their values assessment. So we've done 27 of these in many nations, and in some nations, like France and Sweden, we do one of these assessments every year, and we're able to track what is going on in the nation. It's like a dashboard of what's going on in the culture of the society in France and Sweden. So it enables us to track what's happening and what's not happening, and we measure something called cultural entropy. It's the degree of dysfunction in the system, and that is a very key indicator coming out of our assessment for organizations and for nations and for communities, by the way. And so, we watch closely whether cultural entropy is going down or up. So if you have a high level of cultural entropy, it means you've got a highly dysfunctional society. Now, something really interesting happened in 2008 when we more than just started playing with this. We were developing it, not to the point we have now. But I did the cultural values assessment for Iceland, and Iceland's the most democratic country on the planet, so I expected really great results and low level of cultural entropy. Cultural entropy was at 52%, which is ginormous, and I was like shocked.
Wow!
And I looked at the results, and I could see why. And I went to Iceland and I said, look, if you had this level of cultural entropy and you were an organization with this level of cultural entropy, you'd be going bankrupt about now, because so much energy would be going into dysfunctional procedures.
Right.
2 weeks later, Iceland went bankrupt.
Wow! Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Well, that's fascinating. So, do you follow the United States?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've got dual citizenship. I'm a U.S. and a UK national.
Well, how do we compare here in the United States? I mean, we
mapped the values of the U.S. for 3 years, in the first 3 years of the Obama administration. We haven't done it since, but even then, we had entropy levels up in the 50s, and it was clear to me that there was some deep malaise inside the USA, because you don't have that level of cultural entropy unless you've got a lot of societal dysfunction. And it was like almost a pre-warning of, what came along at the presidential elections last year. It was like signaling that there are huge rifts in society, a lack of social cohesion. That's what happens when you get high cultural entropy. You get a lack of social cohesion. But anyhow.
Wow.
So in fact, recently I've developed a new indicator which called the Global Consciousness Indicator, and in fact I'm just writing that up now in a report. And in fact, just this morning I was comparing the results for Canada and the USA, and
how did they vary?
Well, significantly. Canada is a very different country to the USA. Now,
Right.
USA ranks about 110 in the world in terms of violence. I mean, it's amongst all the developed nations, the USA is probably one of the worst in terms of what I call level 2 violence. And of
Wow.
course, very, very different to Canada in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
However, what's interesting, on the other hand, the USA ranks number 1 in the world in terms of education, access and quality of education, and the entrepreneurial business environment. So,
That's
it's very
right.
interesting
What
that,
kind of correlations you draw to that?
yeah. So, it's and
Hopefully not
anyhow,
causation.
yeah. So yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating with this new assessment I've done. Is actually not an assessment. I took 17 global indicators that are produced by other people. I allocated them to the 7 levels model, so there's 2 or 3 indicators for every level. I normalized the data, and then I was able to. I can tell you, which is the best country. Which is the best country to live in if you are very interested in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's Slovenia. I
Oh.
mean, and hardly anybody's ever heard of it. And the best country to live in terms of social cohesion,
Mm-hmm.
is New Zealand. And so I can tell you, lots of interesting facts about the different countries. Interestingly, the fact that I noticed this morning when I was working on this report was that the top countries in the world are definitely the Scandinavians in terms of consciousness. However,
Hmm.
they the Anglo-Saxon nations, the Australia, New Zealand, Canada, are
Mm-hmm.
actually better at these than the Scandinavians at social cohesion, which is interesting. But anyhow, many, many different facts. We're going off on tangents here because I'm excited about the work I'm doing, and
Well,
I
I'm
need I
interested.
need I need to listen to your question.
No, these are great. This is very fascinating to me. I'm curious if you did any Middle East or
Yeah, well, I've done the whole world.
type of countries, Japan or.
Okay. So with the measurement that we do,
Mhm.
we've done. We've mapped the values of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. But with the new global consciousness indicator thing that I'm working on, I've actually got data now for 170 different nations.
Wow. I'm curious, have you done Lebanon or anything in that region or
No, in terms of our national values assessment, no, we've done 27 of those. That's all we've done,
Mhm.
27 different nations. But in terms of the global consciousness indicator, which is more of a desk exercise,
Uh-huh.
as I say, I've looked at 170 different nations. So no, in terms of mapping values, only 27, and it includes Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, but it doesn't include any other countries in that region except Turkey. We did Turkey last year.
Well, after you've seen the results, did it make you want to move anywhere? I'm curious. Like, this would be the perfect place for me based on what I found out here.
Well, there are, I'm thinking of writing a paragraph at the front of this report which says, if you're interested in this, go to this country. If you're interested in this, go to this country.
That
For
would be
me,
great. Yeah.
yeah, I can do that. I've got all that data. But actually, for me, what I like is to keep warm. And although I live in London in the winter, I actually live in Italy in the summer.
Ah, well, that's a good that's a good combination. I don't blame you. What part of Italy?
Just south of Tuscany. Sorry, just south of Florence in Tuscany, at
Oh.
a little town called Greve in Chianti, and we have a place in the countryside there. And I'm usually there from April till end of September.
Well, do you see differences within the different regions of Italy or the U.S.? I mean, do you do an overall assessment or do you?
I don't have that level of detail yet.
Mhm.
I've been working at a global national level up to this point.
Mhm.
Um, and but that's, that will be for the future. And if a particular country or somebody is particularly interested in doing an analysis by region, I can absolutely do that quite easily. It's just I write so much. I've written a book every year now for 7 years.
I know.
Uh,
Oh, how many? You have a lot.
I've written 11 books altogether, and
Wow.
and I've got books lined up that I want to write for the next 2 or 3 years. So yeah, so it's of course just a question of getting onto my priority list.
Well, you're a busy guy. Did you ever talk to Obama or anybody else about your results that in high?
Nah, no. Interestingly,
Mm-hmm.
this year has seen a huge increase in recognition for my work. I've been doing this work professionally, or shall I say, getting paid for it for 20 years now.
Uh-huh.
And it's just this year that I really got a significant amount of global recognition for what I've been doing.
What changed?
More, I don't know. It's just, I guess we've just been putting stuff out into the world, and people begin noticing. I did a blog on early, I think it was late last year or early this year, on Donald Trump, and that got like 15,000 hits. And then more recently, I just did based on that data I got from the 500,000 people who've done our personal values assessment. I wrote a blog about the values of humanity, and that's got over 3,000 hits. And yeah, it's not just that. It's like it's been building over the time, and yeah, lots of interesting things are happening right now.
Well, I'm curious. You're going to probably assess the United States now that we have Trump in office. What changes do you think you'll see based on that, or do you make any predictions?
Well, I think actually, the level of cultural entropy will be just as high as it was 4 or 5 years ago, because nothing's been resolved. Nothing's changed really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the people who voted for Trump really are not seeing. I'm not seeing too many benefits. I mean, it's a very interesting situation. You vote for a guy. These people voted for the guy who, put more money in their pockets, and he's not a guy who's going to do that. He's going to feed the rich because those are his people. However, he resonates with the people who, probably missed out on, higher education or never traveled the world, and yeah, it's I think the level of cultural entropy in USA is getting worse and worse, frankly, and I think I think if we measured again, we'd see it had got worse, and I don't,
That'd be interesting to see. Where do we fall? I mean, who's the worst who had the highest level of cultural entropy of all the countries? Do you remember?
Well, out of the 27, Venezuela.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, just look what's going on in Venezuela. I mean, it's like the riot time, and the government doesn't, it's been going down and down and down over the past decade. We have data from Argentina at the beginning of this century, 2002, 2003, and that was very high. But what happened there was Argentina went bankrupt, I think, in 2003, and that's and that has something to do with this. The cultural entropy was very high there too. But there's a whole bunch of nations in Europe with cultural entropy in the 50%, and that includes the UK. We mapped the values of UK in 2012, and we had 50-some% entropy, and it was like, okay, this is similar to USA. There's a lot of problems here, and and that showed up in the Brexit vote, because basically in the USA and the UK, you've got a large, probably half the people who got left behind economically, and they are finding their voice and saying enough is enough. the rich were just getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. And, and there's a reason for that, because what happens is if you've got wealth and you invest it, the rate of increase of the rate of return on your wealth is much higher than the increase in wages that has been going on, increase in salaries. So if you didn't have wealth and you just relied on your salaries, you increased at, say, 1 or 2% per year. Whereas if you've got wealth and invested it, you increase at 5 or 10%. Now, you don't have to increase at 5 or 10% every year for long to build a big gulf between the rich and the poor. And that's exactly what's happened in America or USA and in the United Kingdom. And, its successive governments have really not paid attention to the needs of the less well off. And, the situation with regard to health services in the USA is absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, when you compare it to what goes on in Europe with our, it's like, my God, there's no compassion in the country for poor people, none whatsoever.
Yeah, it is a big difference. And I'm curious, when you get this data, and if you don't, do you get to any of the world leaders? You said not Obama, but any of the others? I mean, what advice do you give them now that they know their data? I mean, where do they go?
Okay, so we've been working in the background doing this work for, as I say, significantly for the last 10 years. And we're getting more and more recognition, but we don't have the sort of recognition that you're assuming we do. We don't. And it's coming very slowly. I mean, the thing, last week when I was in Brazil, we got a tremendous amount of publicity for the results of the assessment. And but most politicians really aren't that very interested, frankly. They're more interested in their own self-esteem and lining their own nests. I mean, in Brazil, it's terrible, the corruption at the highest levels of government. And actually, frankly, I don't think it's that much better even in the more developed world. We're going through a whole series of scandals now in the UK Parliament, sex scandals, and then we had 3 or 4 years ago, everybody all the elected members fiddled their expenses. That was a huge scandal. I mean, these people these people who govern our countries are not highly enlightened people, frankly. They're not. And so if somebody comes along and says, well, hell, I can measure your consciousness, they go, well, what the hell is consciousness?
Well, it looks like you've got your work cut out for you. I mean, it sounds so fascinating that you've been able to get this much data. And I can imagine why you have so many books to write if you're doing this much work. Do you get any sleep?
Well, actually, so I mentioned earlier, I'm very, I live at one with my soul, and many people think they have a soul, but actually, you don't have a soul. You are a soul, and I live from soul consciousness. So when you say, "Do you get any sleep?" My soul constantly wakes me up again every morning around 3:30 to 5 o'clock with information. I call it downloads, and so. I was up at 3:30 this morning, typing away because I was getting a download. And then I around 6, I might go to bed for an hour and a half, and and then I'm good for the rest of the day as long as I have a nap in the afternoon. And so, it's I have a very interesting life, I can tell you. I wish my soul would respect my sleep hours, but it doesn't.
I can relate to that. And the sleep part of it, I understand that what that you're doing is just fascinating. I think we see so many companies and organizations that have so many problems with engagement, and I think everybody's looking at ways to improve that. And I could see how what you're doing can, you can reach people at so many different levels, individual, corporate, and government, and whatever. And I think it's really fascinating. I think a lot of people would like to know how they could find out more about, your assessments, how they, you said you could share a website and all that. Can you do that?
Sure. Okay. So, if you're listening, go and get a pen and a piece of paper, and here's some information. First of all, I've got a lot of free materials and a lot of books, but you can go to richardbarrett.net, www.richardbarrett.net. That will take you to the Values Center. That's the company website. That's Values plural center, spelled the European way, CANTRE.com. So valuescenter.com and richardbarrett.net. Now, if you want to do the free personal assessment, and it only takes like 5 minutes to do, and you get the results 3-4 minutes later, you go to Values Center, that's valuescentre.com/PVA, personal values assessment /PVA. And it's in 15 or 16 different languages. So if you're not a native English speaker and you're listening, you can do it in your own language. So those are the main 3 websites that I think viewers would be interested in. On my website, richardbarrett.net, you'll find podcasts, you'll find videos, you'll find books, you'll find articles. I mean, there's just a bunch of information that you can draw upon if you're interested in these topics.
Well, that's so great of you to share all that, Richard. This has been fascinating. I'm sure everybody's listening going, wow, I didn't even know about some of this. And I think I knew a lot that you were helping with all the values, but I didn't realize the extent to your research globally. That's amazing. So
I just add one more thing. I just
Sure.
brought out a new book called it's a relatively short book for my books, about 120 pages, called Everything I've Learned About Values. And I actually gave it away for a month in October to coincide with World Values Day. But actually the book will be, it's going to press in about 3 weeks. So if you look around the beginning of December in Amazon or whoever you buy your books from, somewhere in December or early January, you'll be able to buy Everything I Learned About Values. And I'm just getting the endorsements in right now, and they're really, I'm really knocked out by what terrific endorsements I've got for that book, because it's really a primer for people. It's like, you're interested in values? Read this book. It's called Everything I've Learned About Values.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been fascinating.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. And we'll be back right after this message.